depths. Jack was an experienced hiker, someone who preferred the solitude of the wilderness over the crowded noise of the city. He often sought out remote trails where he could lose himself in nature, away from the distractions of modern life. This time, however, he decided to explore a part of the forest that was rarely mentioned by other hikers, a dense, untamed area deep within the woods. After days of trekking, Jack noticed that something about this part of the forest felt wrong. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an eerie silence that weighed heavily on him. As the sun began to set on the third day, Jack found a small clearing to set up camp. The sky turned a deep crimson, and shadows stretched long across the forest floor. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, but every time he turned around, there was nothing but trees and underbrush. Late at night, as Jack lay in his tent, the silence was broken by a low, guttural growl. It sounded close, too close for comfort. He quickly grabbed his flashlight and unzipped the tent, scanning the darkness. A beam of light cut through the night, revealing nothing but trees and darkness beyond. Just an animal, he muttered to himself, trying to ignore the growing noise in the sky. But the growl came again, this time louder and more menacing. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that whatever made that sound was circling his camp. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging him into complete darkness. Panic surged through him as he fumbled with the light, desperately trying to get it to work. The growl grew closer, and he could hear the sound of something large moving through the underbrush, coming straight toward him. Finally, the flashlight blinked back on, and Jack pointed towards the source of the noise. His breath caught in his throat as he saw it. A creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It stood on two legs, towering over him, its body covered in metal fur. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, filled with intelligence that chilled him to the bone. The creature's mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth, and its claws looked strong enough to tear through metal. Jack knew he had to run. Without thinking, he bolted into the forest, not caring about the darkness or the dangers that lay hidden in the trees. He could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind him, its growls turning into a deafening roar. He ran blindly through the forest, branches broken against his face, adrenaline pushing him forward. But no matter how fast he ran, the creature was always just behind him, his breath hot on his neck. In his panic, Jack stumbled and fell, hitting the ground hard. The flashlight flew from his hand, and he scrambled to find it, his fingers digging into the dirt. But before he could reach it, the creature was upon him. Jack looked up just in time to see the creature's glowing eyes staring down at him, filled with a hunger that promised only pain and death. He screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the creature's roar as it lunged at him. The last thing Jack saw was the creature's maw opening wide, ready to devour him whole. For Howling Woods. Rachel and Tom had been friends since childhood, and every summer they would take a trip into the woods to camp and explore. This year, they decided to venture into a forest they had never visited before. A place known locally as the Howling Woods, the name intrigued them, and despite the warnings from locals about strange noises and disappearances, they couldn't resist the allure of an adventure. They set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees that seemed to block out the sky. As night fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of wildlife. But as the hours passed, the usual noises of the night began to fade, replaced by something far more sinister. It started with a distant howling, faint at first, but growing louder and more distinct as time went. Rachel and Tom exchanged uneasy glances, both trying to mask their fear with forced smiles. "It's just wolves," Tom said, though his voice lacked confidence. "They won't come near us." But Rachel wasn't so sure. There was something off about the howls, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. They didn't sound like any wolves she had ever heard. There was an unnatural, almost human quality to them. The howling continued, seeming to come from all around them, echoing through the trees in a way that made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. It was as if the forest itself was alive and crying out in pain. As the night wore on, the howling grew louder, more frenzied. Rachel and Tom sat close to the fire, their nerves on edge, jumping at every sound. Then, without warning, the howling stopped. The sudden silence was even more terrifying than the norm. "Maybe we should pack up and leave," Rachel suggested, her voice trembling. Tom nodded, and they began to hurriedly gather their Tom, only the remnants of their camp, scattered and torn as if by some wild animal. The howling woods had claimed 2 more victims, and the locals knew that by nightfall, the howling would begin again.